be. We'll probably be there for next week. Hello, everyone. Today we're going to start diving into the books of the Jewish people, and Jews wrote a lot of books. Okay, so there's a lot of material. You got to listen well. There's going to be a very hard test at the end. Okay.
I'll be traveling then.
Yeah. I don't want to say what happens if you don't pass it.
Let's go.
I don't want to make any threats here, right?
I can't make it that day.
You can't make already, you
We're,
know.
we're going to be traveling together.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Exactly.
I'm going to make a cheat sheet.
And just so we go over kind of like what are those books, and so the Tanakh, which is the Bible, and if we go according, to our famous timeline, one here. Okay, so the Tanakh is kind of like, right? We said it's around like 300-400 BCE. Okay, the biblical apocrypha, which are not, it's a good debate, are these Jewish books, because traditional Judaism would not call them Jewish books. Definitely not in the Orthodox world, but they were written by Jews. They were written about Jews. They were written about the people of Israel, and they're like around the time of the Second Temple. Josephus, which is a very important book, which is around the destruction of the Second Temple. The Mishnah, which is the year 219, and the Tosefta, which is like a parallel to the Mishnah, around the same time as well. Midrash Halacha, Midrash Agadah, we'll talk about those a little bit as well. They're around the 300, 400, 500, and even 600 sometimes CE. And some of them are written in the land of Israel, and some of them are written in Babylonian. Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, that's around the year 400, and the Babylonian Talmud, which is around the year 550. The Geonic literature that follows that, which is a very interesting literature as well, which we'll touch on just a little bit of that, but that's around the year 800 to the year 1100. That's the time of the Geonics and their literature. Rashi on the Talmud and the Bible is the 11th century. Tosafot, which are commentaries as well on the Bible, which is the 12th, 13th, and 14th century, and they worked in France, Germany, and some of them in England as well. Then we have the Rambam, Maimonides, from the 12th and the 13th century. He passed away at the beginning of the 13th century. And he was in Spain, Cairo, and other places. Ramban, which is a Nachmanides, which is kind of his parallel 13th century. Spanish literature, Abarbanel, Ibn Griol. These are more like these are poets mainly, but also commentaries on the Bible. Yehuda Halevi, who writes the Kuzari in the 13th, 14th century, I believe. Kabbalah and the Zohar, which I mentioned to you last time, is really a mystic book that in tradition is perceived to be written around the 2nd century, but scholars, really when analyzing it and looking at the language, the Aramaic language, see it's a much later writing, and they say it's around the year like the 11th century probably. Then we have the Shulchan Aruch, which we talked about also last week, and Joseph Caro, that's the 16th century. Shabtai Tzvi, who's really a very controversial figure. It was like perceived to be the Messiah by many people, and then converted to Islam, and really crushed the hearts of many Jews and many that followed him and became Muslim as well. It's a very fascinating story of the 18th century, 17th century. And followed by that is really the Chassidut, the emergence of Chassidut, and their writings, which we'll look about. That's like the 18th, 19th centuries. And then the Mithnagdim, which we talked about, which are the opposition to them, the Gaon Vilna and others that we mentioned last week. That's also the end of the 18th century, 19th century until today. We're going to look at a very interesting genre, which is responsa throughout the generations, which is the phenomena of asking a rabbi a question and sending it. Usually the question is sent to rabbis living at big centers, like the more famous rabbis, and it's usually more local rabbis are sending questions to like the greater rabbis, the more recognized rabbis. They're sending them a question, okay, and they respond. So it's called the responsa literature, and that's a fascinating phenomena. And we have millions, not millions, yeah, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of responses like that. And it's a great way to also learn history and and how Jewish communities were conducting themselves. We're going to talk about North Africa and Middle East rabbis, the main rabbis and figures there, and their writings, which is also very different sometimes from Ashkenazi Jewry. We're going to talk about the Enlightenment, Mendelssohn and Reform Judaism at the 19th century, end of the 18th century. We're going to talk about Zachariah Frankel and Heinrich Tzvi Graetz. That's me. Okay? And the book and the volumes, the 6-volume books I wrote of history of the Jews. Okay, you can pass that along. Heinrich is Tzvi, but it's not me. It's just a joke. Okay.
You look really good for that guy.
Yeah.
You've aged well.
I thought that book was really old.
Is that named after
What?
that?
I thought that book.
Yeah,
was really old.
I'm not named after him, but he is a family relative. I'll show you one day, like sort of like the family tree.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
for the responses, were there scribes that took down the questions and the responses from the major rabbis?
Yeah. There were scribes everywhere that did that, and we have in archives, we have all these, and then they were typed also at a certain point and became very popular books, and you can actually rule halacha from that. You could take a rabbi's responsa and rule accordingly.
So was Vilnius one of the areas they would send questions to?
There would, it would be all over the world, all over the Jewish world. It's
Do
a
they
fascinating
answer more questions than just one in the book?
Yeah, they would answer many questions, and they would compile them. Yeah, not this book, but they would compile them, and they would edit the books, and then they would bring them out. It's a fascinating phenomenon. And if you go in like in a Jewish library, where in that section, that will go, you'd fill up the whole building there with all those books. It's now a lot of it is online, and a lot of it are like on like these softwares, which I have, and you learn a lot from that. We'll talk about that as well. So we'll talk about Zachariah Frankel and Heinrich Tzvi Graetz, which are like the founders of what we know today as conservative Judaism. We're going to talk about the early Zionist thinkers before Herzl. We're going to talk a little bit about Herzl as well. We're going to move a little bit also to something that, not necessarily so Jewish, but it is Jewish because it's Israeli culture and Israeli poetry and literature. And like Shai Agnon and Bialik and like the main authors of the contemporary Jewish authors of today. And we're going to talk about Holocaust literature as well, okay? Because we know that that created a lot of literature of different kinds. We're going to try to talk about main American Jewish writings, okay? I'm not an expert on these, and maybe, someone here could also help us, but we want to recognize that as well. We're going to talk about main Soviet and European Jewish writings, so we don't ignore that. Maybe, I can't think of specific Latin American Jewry, but if we could think of some, we'll bring that up as well. We're going to talk just a little bit about the Jewish prayer book, because we had a whole session about prayer books, okay? So just so we recognize that part in our series, we're going to talk about the Passover Haggadah, okay? It's its own special literature that we also talked about that when we had our session about Passover last year. So it's all there, but we're just going to recognize that in a little bit. And we're going to talk about the Milon Even Yehuda, which is the dictionary, which is one of the phenomena, right, of also like the modern Hebrew and those dictionaries. And we're going to talk about other dictionaries as well. Some of these things we're just going to touch a little bit, and some of them we're really going to dive in a lot.
We're all going to do this in a couple of sessions.
Right. For the rest of our lives, we're going to spend the rest of our lives doing this. Okay.
You wanted me to get the name of that show that I've been watching on screen. It's called Against All Odds.
Okay, that's the show of.
That's the show that takes individuals who think they had a miracle happen to them.
Oh, okay, interesting. Okay, good. Okay, so the first one is the Tanakh, the Bible. Okay, as you can see written here, the 24 books of the Bible. I'm going to try not to spend too much time on it, because this is not a Bible course, but just so we recognize and understand the book a little bit, compiled around the year of 300 to 400, but combined of different books that each of them was edited and compiled at a different time. Okay, so and we don't have any evidence or proof. I can't prove to you that it was edited at around the year 300, okay? And some scholars say it's happened much more late. It's much later, around the year 180 maybe. Some people say, like even the book of the Maccabees, which is around the year 160 BCE, could have been in the Bible, but the rabbis rejected it, okay? It's like, these are theories that are less conventional, but they're out there. Some people say, no, the Bible is edited even earlier, which would be around the year maybe 400 or 500. Okay, so different opinions around that. I think the common opinion today is like around the year 400 BCE. And for sure, no one could say that the Bible is edited at the year 200, because how do we know that? Because we know that the literature coming after it, okay, already relates to that book as a whole book. Okay, so it's not really possible that, that in the year 200, there's no 24 books of the Bible. Okay, there are debates between the rabbis. Why was this book accepted? Why was that book not accepted, etc. For example, the book, The Song of Songs, the rabbi says that should never been accepted. It's like a love song, even sometimes pornographic, some pornography there. Okay, the way it talks about the sexual relationships between man and woman, but then it comes now everyone's interested, right, to learn about the book. And maybe one day we will learn about that book, because the rabbis come and say, no, it's a love relationship between God and the people of Israel. So they're using metaphors, they're using sexual metaphors to show us that love. Okay, so that's how the rabbis solve that.
I
But
thought
the more,
I thought they were viewed as apologists for the secular nature of Song of Songs, and so
right,
they
right. So
kinda-
that's so the more modern scholars say the people of Israel love that song so much, that the book so much that they couldn't ignore not having it there. Okay, so it's like could be different.
Isn't it the same motif? Lechadodi, that's what.
Yeah,
we sing.
yeah,
this-
Lechadodi,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, that's from there. Very good. Okay, let's just get a quick overview of the books of the Bible. I'd be very happy to get some water, please, as well. Okay, so we have the Torah. Okay, we have 5 books in the Torah, right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, thank you, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Okay, those are the 5 books of Moses, the 5 books of the Torah, and each of these books has a Torah portion to it, right? It's divided into 54 parshas, and they each have its own week of the year. And that's how it's laid out also here.
It's not doing the Jewish
This table
calendar.
of context. Sorry?
It's not associated with the Jewish calendar, which is 48 weeks.
No, I think, well, first of all, I think it's 52 weeks. And also there's some parshas that come together, that are attached, mechubar.
Well, when you have a leap year.
And when you have the leap year, so they're all of them, each one is individual, and sometimes when you have less weeks in that year, so they're attached together. Okay, so they're like different rules for that. By the way, in the ancient land of Israel, they did not have Torah portions. This is more like a Babylonian invention. Okay, in the ancient land of Israel, they read the Torah in 3 or 3.5 years, and they didn't have Torah portions and names. They only read like a third.
Also, I thought I had read that, different times and different customs, some of them read the whole Torah. Like at a holiday, whether it was the New Year, they would.
Yeah, they would, once it's 7 years, it's assumed that they read the whole Torah.
Jubilee.
Not at the Jubilee, but it's called the Hakel, after the Shemitah year. Okay, moving on to the prophets.
Rabbi, whenever you say they read, who read? Only the people in the temple? Because regular people, I don't know they read.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. At the time of the temple, it's not very clear where they read Torah. It seems like there was reading of the Torah in the different markets. And even the Talmud presumes that Monday and Thursday was a market day. Okay,
That's what.
Thursday you would buy all your stuff before Shabbat.
In Jerusalem or in other
everywhere, every town would have that. Okay, and Monday you would buy
Even
the
the
supplies
Christians
for
had
the rest of the week, in between. And the rabbis saw that people would congregate in those markets. Okay, and they instituted reading of the Torah in those areas on a Monday and a Thursday, like just a little bit of the Torah portion, like a promo to remind people what's going to be read. And then on Shabbat, people would get together and read the Torah without even a service, okay? Not in the temple. When did that start? It's not clear, but some people said it even started at the time of the Second Temple.
Wasn't there also a requirement that sometimes that the king was supposed to read the Torah?
Yeah, that's that once in 7 years, the king would, after the year, not of the Jubilee, of the Shemitah, the Jubilee is once in 50 years.
Right.
I'm talking about every 7th year.
Every 7th.
Yeah, when you have the Shemitah, right? So then the king would open the book and would read from it. Would he read the entire Torah? And not clear. It probably parts of the Torah. Okay. So the Torah, the Bible, the Hebrew Bible has three parts to it, right? Which is the Torah, prophets, which is Nevi'im, and writings, which is Ktuvim. Okay, and that's how the name Tanakh came about. Okay, right?
Yeah.
We have Ta, Nach. Okay, Ta, Nach. Okay, like this. Okay, the T stands for Torah. Okay, the N stands for Nevi'im,
Right.
which means prophets, and the Chaf stands for Ktuvim. Okay, Ktuvim, which is writings. Okay, so that's how we get the word Tanakh. Did everyone hear the word Tanakh
Yeah.
in the past? Okay, so this is how we get to that.
Rabbi?
Or the Bible, but then we get confused. Oh, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament. So it's like,
Is that sometimes spelled with a C?
yeah, CH.
Because I've always said it with a CA.
That's interesting. Yeah, let's see. How's it here? Yes, CH. Yeah, maybe we could write it with a CH. That's better. Where's the
Eraser.
eraser?
Look in the
It still
basket.
comes from Ketuvim, though.
Hmm?
However you spell it in English.
Is okay, right? Could
Yeah.
be like
Yeah.
this or like this, yeah.
Rabbi, is it thought that Ezra played a part in compiling part of the Tanakh?
Yeah, it is. It's according to the tradition. Ezra it had to do, with compiling the Tanakh, but it's harder to explain that from the modern scholars. They look at it differently.
Did the Christians pick up the marketing on Mondays and Thursdays from the Jews, or did they pick it up just because that's the way it was always everywhere?
I did not know that the Christians have the market on Monday and Thursday. Where do you know
Well,
that from?
All of the
Is that like-
Europeans had Monday and Thursday were market days.
Uh-huh. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, maybe they picked it up. I didn't. Yeah, it's like, and obviously, I don't think the Jews would not have their own market days. It would, they could
Yeah, but-
merchandise with everyone else.
It makes sense for Monday,
Yeah, for everyone
Monday and
to,
Thursday,
yeah,
getting
to
ready
do it
for the weekend,
together.
recovering for the weekend.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Then let's look at Nevi'im. Okay, so we have the book of Joshua, which is really the passing from over the Jordan River. Once the Israelites walked for 40 years at the desert, that's how the Torah ends with Moses. Moses passes away. He passes the torch to Joshua, and Joshua kind of like conquers the land. And that's really what the book of Joshua talks about the people of Israel conquering the land, dividing up the land to the 12 different tribes and settling the land. At the end of that book, Joshua passes away, and there's no specific leadership that he transfers it to. Okay, and that really creates the period of the times of the judges. Okay, and then there's no central leadership for the people of Israel. Each tribe, has its leadership, and there's no one leader, there's no one king or one Moses or one Joshua for the people of Israel that everyone follows. Okay, and what happens during that period is the people of Israel sin, they forget about God, and then God brings troubles upon them, which is like the enemies, the Philistines usually, but also other enemies trying to rule them. And then the people of Israel cry out to God and say, God, we're so sorry for being so bad. Please help us. And God sends them a savior. The savior saves them, And then it says, Vatishkot haaretz 40 shana, the land was quiet for 40 years, 20 years, depends on, each, one of them was even 80 years. It's like, I would give anything now for 20 years of quiet in the land of Israel, right? With no wars, no nothing like that, and prosperity. And then the people of Israel settle down, they're happy, and they forget God again, and the whole cycle happens again. So this goes on for like 350 years at the time of the book of Judges, or the famous judges we know.
Deborah.
Right, the woman judge, which is interesting. Samson. Okay, Samson. Anyone else? Iftach, the one that sacrifices his daughter. Okay, if you remember that kind of like harsh story of that judge, and a few other famous ones.
Well, this says Samuel too.
Well, Samuel is the next one.
Yeah.
Okay, Samuel was a judge, but also a prophet. He's really the first prophet from the prophet era. And Samuel is a leader, but he's not a king, and he's partially a judge and a prophet, and he speaks directly to God. And he is really the prophet that finds King Saul and anoints him, anoints him, and what an annoying word. And then once King Saul fails, okay, he removes him from his kingdom. So he removes the house of Benjamin away from being the prophet, the king, and he anoints David, and the house of David becomes the rulers and the kings of the people of Israel, moving forward from there. And so also really around his time begins the time of kingdom. The next, and there's Samuel 1 and Samuel 2. Okay, that division of Samuel 1 and Samuel 2, that's a more Christian division. Okay, in the Hebrew Bible, there's no really division in that sense.
The same thing for Kings.
Kings, yeah, there's Kings 1 and Kings 2. That's a Christian division. There's even Kings 1, 2, 3, and 4 in some yeah, but there's only, it's the same text.
Yeah.
But in the Jewish tradition, there's just one book of Kings. Kings 1 and 2 really describes the passing away of David, King David, and his kingdom, and moving it on to his son, King Solomon. The building of the first temple is described in the book of Kings, and then also the sad split between the kingdom of Judea, and the kingdom of Israel. The northern part of the land of Israel is now in the hands of the kingdom of the 10 tribes, and the more southern part, the Jerusalem part, and the more southern part are in the hands of the Judeans. Okay, which the Jews afterwards come out of that. The 10 tribes are the lost tribes. We don't know where they are, and really the book of Kings ends with all of Israel being exiled. The Judeans are exiled to Babylonia, and a few hundred years before them, the Israelite tribes, the 10 tribes, are exiled to Assyria and to other places all over the world. That's how the book of Kings ends. And then, those are really the historical parts. So Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, those are all more like historic books that tell the tales of the people of Israel until the destruction of the second temple. And that also can help us understand the framework of what the Bible is talking about. The Bible talks about that, and also the return afterwards back but not a lot more than that. So we know that's around the time that the Bible is written. Now come the real prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Each of them prophesize in in their own time. Isaiah is first, and Jeremiah is after him. Jeremiah is also at the time of the destruction of the second temple. Ezekiel is sort of like on the border. He's actually in Babylonia, and he has all these visions that he talks about the people of Israel going back to the land of Israel one day. The
Yeah, I always
Trey
thought he was,
Asar,
on
I'm sorry.
I always thought he might have been on some peyote or something because.
Yeah, his visions are very interesting. He even talks about electricity, chashmal, which is interesting. He doesn't mean electricity as we know it today, but it's like sparks of electricity in the sky that he sees in his visions.
Isn't that lightning?
No, it's not lightning, because there's a word in Hebrew for lightning. He does not use that word. So it's not clear what these are visions that he sees.
Meteor.
Did any of his visions actually bear any fruit? I mean, did anybody
Yeah.
try to develop what he had envisioned?
Well, these are more like historical visions of the people of Israel returning to land, and that happens.
I remember,
And the vision of rebuilding the temple, which is
Well,
also
that's what I was
rebuilt.
thinking, and when you had mentioned all the things about Herzl and all of his visionary
Yeah,
ideas,
so
it's
that's a very good
very
point.
interesting.
I think
that it
that's a very good
repeats.
point, because Ezekiel, in a way, is like Herzl, right? Yeah, but he speaks directly to God, speaks directly to him.
I seem to remember that Rabbi Shulman once said that what was remarkable was that we don't understand Ezekiel, but apparently the people did at the time he was, around. So apparently people understood his visions and it just never translated to more modern times.
That's a very good point. I think he knew how to speak to the people, and I think another interesting point is that in many ways Ezekiel is the founder of Judaism outside the land of Israel, because the rabbis, the leaders that were exiled came to him and said, what are we going to do now that we don't have the temple anymore and we can't keep our religion and we're a minority here and God has sort of like abandoned us? Okay, so he tells them, you still have to keep doing the commandments, and you could still be Jews even though there's no temple, even though you're not in the land of Israel. So he kind of like puts that idea that you could practice Judaism outside of the geographical area of the land of Israel, which was, for us, seems like, okay, what's the big deal? For them, that was a revolutionary idea, a very revolutionary idea, because they thought, okay, God's not with us, he deserted us, we don't have a temple anymore, let's just become, like the Babylonians, okay?
So
But
who
they
were
didn't do that.
chosen as the rabbis to develop Judaism?
Hmm?
Who
Oh,
were the rabbis?
Oh, that comes much later. We'll talk about that when we talk about the Mishnah and etc. We don't have rabbis at this point. The word rabbi does not exist in this time. The leadership, the spiritual leaderships of the people of Israel here are the prophets. Okay. Later on, when the second temple is rebuilt, the spiritual leadership are the priests. Okay, they are the ones that have all the spiritual power, because they sacrifice to God directly. They atone for the people of Israel. And if you want anything to communicate with God, you bring your sacrifice to God, to the priest, and the priest does it for you on his behalf. You don't have a direct communication with God. And when the second temple is destroyed, Okay, and there's sort of like a void because prophets no longer exist, and there's no need anymore for the priests. That's when the rabbis sect sort of like emerges and is invented in a way, and they take sort of like the spiritual leadership of careful. There's water there.
Did we not through archaeology discover that there were, I hesitate to call it a synagogue, but worship areas beside the temple because people couldn't always,
Yeah,
get to the temple. I was wondering, did they survive the destruction of the?
yeah. So there are a few archaeological evidence that there were synagogues even at the time of the Second Temple. Even when there was a Second Temple, there are archaeological evidence that there were synagogues. It's very hard to prove that because those places were used after that, after the destruction of the Second Temple, for synagogues as well. So to actually distinguish the difference, the times of each one is not easy, but most archaeologists today agree that there were places of people would congregate around these areas and would read Torah, etc. But after the Second Temple destruction, they were definitely synagogues, and the land of Israel is full of archaeological evidence for synagogues like that. And by the way, also in Turkey and in Spain and in Egypt, there is archaeological evidence, and Syria, archaeological evidence of Jewish synagogues there. Very, very ancient. Okay.
So I had a question about the lost tribes.
Uh-huh.
What made the difference between the lost tribes in the north and the southern? One was kind of like saved and kept Judaism, and the other didn't. They just disappeared. So what made that lost tribes disintegrate into whatever, or assimilate into the population? Did they not have leaders? Or I just don't know the history.
That's a fascinating question. I don't know if there could be any, there's no answer that I could give you that has evidence, because these are all assumptions. But the main assumption is really, if you look at the Bible and you go back to what I said, for example, about Ezekiel, the fact that you could practice your religion outside of the geographical area where you were was revolutionary at the time. And this we know from all the other nations' writings that we explore today, that we learn that a certain nation would be in a certain geographical area with a certain God. Okay, so the God of Israel was in Israel. Okay, that's where he operated. Okay, if the people were exiled, God remained in the land of Israel. He didn't go with them. Okay, that was sort of like the thinking of all the other nations. God obviously is the exception of that, because God could be wherever he wants. Okay, but that's not how people perceived it. Okay, if, for example, let's take other gods, the Babylonian gods, they really believed that it's only in their territory that he could help them win the war. Okay, and that's why if they went out to a different country, they took their statues with them. Until today, when nations go out with flags, that's sort of like to preserve this ancient custom that you go with your gods to war. The gods help you in the war, and then you go back, okay, to that place. But if we even have this in the Bible, that the Assyrians would take a certain population from here, and they would switch them. Why? Okay, so they don't rebel against them, and sort of like to diffuse any political unrest, but they would train them on the on all the observances and laws of that religion in that land that they were transferred. And even there are examples like that, even in the Bible, where the people that were moved by the Assyrians of a different religion, and they were moved into the land of Israel. Okay, so they brought priests for them, Jewish priests that were exiled. They brought them back to teach the locals on how to worship God. Okay, so the people of Israel, the 10 tribes that were lost, they kind of like assimilated because they went according to the practice of the other religions. Okay, that's one reason. That's one big reason. And the people of Israel, I mean, the Judeans that went to Babylonian, they had that notion that Ezekiel kind of like planted in them that they could keep their religion and worship God even if they're not with their God. And later on, they found out that God could be everywhere. That was like a more later discovery.
Well, when you go with,
But one more thing that's important also is that the 10 tribes really stuck to the written Torah, and they weren't able to develop the more oral Torah that we'll talk about more when we talk about the Mishnah. But the rabbis that really were the ones that emerged out of the Judean tribes, and they're sort of like the Jews that we are today. And it's, you could see that also with the prophets. Okay, they are really the ones that said that Torah has to be interpreted, and Torah has to continue and take different forms upon itself. Okay, Torah can't stay static as it is in the written book. It has to evolve and change and adapt. And that's sort of like the secret of Judaism until today, and why Judaism is still alive, because Judaism was a flexible religion in that sense. It was always able to keep its core beliefs and halacha and law, but adapt and change and not be,
That Islam doesn't do that.
I
Yeah,
was just gonna say that Islam is bound up in the origins of Islam and can't evolve, or doesn't seem to evolve. It takes over, and this, well, as in India, I mean, there really weren't any choices. You had to become
yeah.
a Muslim then.
And I don't know where, I'm not a prophet. I don't know what will be of the religions in the future, but I do know Judaism is here to stay. And I do know that other very big religions, are not anymore in the faith
So
of the
in
earth.
the era when Israel brought the falashas from Ethiopia, was that somewhat indicative of what you're talking about?
Oh, yeah, because that's a very good
Ten tribes.
example, because they followed the biblical law. Okay, that they were very strict about following the biblical law, and that's sort of like a miracle that they survived that way. And I guess they were more isolated in Africa, and the influences of the other cultures that were around them weren't as strong.
They were in small towns.
Yeah.
There's a story that I tell. Rabbi Jared went to a conference in Colorado, and it was to hear the Dalai Lama speak. And so, well, I don't think he was very impressed. He said he just sort of speaks, whatever's in his mind. He just sort of speaks loosely.
Yeah.
But anyways, when the conference was over, he sent invitations to a few rabbis that he wanted to meet with them privately.
Oh.
And so, the rabbi said everybody's writing questions, but the Dalai Lama didn't want to take questions. He had a question. He wanted to know how the Jews had survived all these thousands of years where he was having trouble keeping his people together.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Modern archaeology with carbon-14 testing and the DNA testing of skeletons and things like that has brought about a lot of really interesting information to supplement the history of the Levant, and particularly of the divided kingdoms. And initially, what the archaeology now shows is that the kingdom of Israel is very much more advanced and much more populated than the kingdom of Judah.
Right.
And that the people in the kingdom of Israel were wealthier, maybe more educated, supposedly, with their own capital, Samaria. And in that capital, there was kind of a falling away from the traditional beliefs in God.
Oh, yeah,
And there was some still kind of falling back to Baal and those kinds of things.
a lot.
Yeah, and so when the Assyrians came down and they took the people from Israel for a couple of reasons, but mostly because they were the wealthier, more affluent. And
Yeah,
then they started importing their own people into and to replace the people, as you had mentioned. That period, though, was really the beginning of the not the resurgence, but the rising of the kingdom of Judah, with
Right.
no longer Israel, the majority of Israelites off in Assyria. The kingdom of Judah began to prosper and become stronger. And Jerusalem, which was initially just a little tiny 5,000 people, maybe a little tiny little town, became more and more dominant. And all of that now is very well described in the archaeology.
yeah, that's very true.
The story of Samuel, doesn't that indicate that there were priests throughout what became Israel rather than Judah? There were priests in little areas, Shiloh and a few other the major cities,
Right.
where priests were. And
Right.
they were the ones who kept the religion of our religion alive and operating.
Yeah, there wasn't one center in Jerusalem. There were different centers before David sort of like brought them all to the center. Okay, in Jerusalem.
But when
you're
you
right.
go, when you go from Joshua onward, wherever they went, they took the ark with them, and that was God's presence.
Right.
And I don't know how long that.
The ark
Yeah,
disappeared
kind of,
after
the
the second
after.
temple.
Yeah, the ark. Yeah, the ark disappeared already in the end of the first temple.
First temple.
Yeah, the end of the first temple that disappeared. And the people of Israel, but throughout that whole period, they kept it once it was the temple built by Solomon, it was situated there. But before that, it would move to different places. Okay. So then we have the 12 prophets. Okay, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah. These are all very short books, okay, unlike Jeremiah, Cheskel, and Isaiah, which are very long books and have a lot of prophets. These are like, prophets that have, just a few chapters on each one of them. Obadiah, for example, is just one chapter. It's the shortest book in the Bible. And I think really the most famous prophet here is Jonah, right? We have the book of Jonah that we read on Yom Kippur and Mincha. Okay, if you look surprised, it means you only come after Mincha.
It's also the longest.
It's a very long of Torah. It's like 5 chapters. It's a very long. That's why some people come after it. But I always say there's nothing else to do on Yom Kippur, so it's like you just be in the synagogue all day. And those are, so each one has its own different characterization, which is interesting. Then we move to the writings. Okay, the writings is a very big and important part of the Bible. We have the book of Psalms, which is like 5 books of different psalms, different poems written. They are attributed to King David. Okay. And in the Jewish tradition, King David is the author of the Psalms. It's probably not the one who wrote it, according to modern scholars. They see it as a different, it's like a group of people that wrote it. They probably say maybe some of the priests and actually probably some of the Levites. Okay, at the temple wrote a lot of these, and a lot of them were used in the temple. Okay, for example, we sing at Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meal, the Shir HaMa'alot, Shir HaMa'alot. Okay, that's, for example, is one of 15 psalms that were sang at the temple. And because there were 15 stairs, very, very long stairs, that all the Levites would go up one stair, sing one of the psalms, go up another one, sing another one, and that way, that's how, they would worship and do, would do that. Next is, yeah.
What is that? How did some of the writings, Shir Shirim, Eicha, and so on get associated with specific holidays?
Oh, I'll talk about that in a second, but
Okay.
in the book of Psalms is not associated with any holidays, but there's some Psalms that we also say every morning in our prayers as well. Reading Psalms has become a very well-known custom for people who are ill. Okay, so a lot of times if you go to a hospital in Israel, you would see, like Orthodox women would be sitting next to the bedside of someone sick and they're just reading Psalms. It's considered like a form of, helping people to heal and praying for them. So there's like a lot of times you just see just the book of Psalms, okay, and it's divided into 5 books and you read each book. It's like it's a whole genre of its own. And there was something funny in Israel. Psalms is Tehillim, okay? Tehillim, okay? And then there's another Hebrew word which is Tilim, okay? This is Psalms and this is Tilim. These are missiles, okay? And during the Iraqi war, when Iraq would fire Tilim missiles, so people would read Tehillim to sort of like stop the missiles, okay? So they would say like Tehillim versus Tilim, okay?
Oh, wow.
That was like it's like a big thing in the 90s.
Those were
That's
the people who weren't serving in the IDF.
Yeah, the people were not serving right.
That was their job.
That was their job, yeah. And it worked, you see.
Yeah, it worked.
Yeah. Then comes the book of Proverbs, which is associated with King Solomon. According to the tradition, he's the one who writes it. But again, scholars say it's not necessarily him that writes it. It's probably proverbs and different like smart sayings that are taken from maybe even other cultures and adapted into Jewish thought. And there are a lot of very good and smart proverbs in those. It's a very interesting book. My father actually wrote a commentary on that, which maybe we will study one day because it's a great commentary. I don't think it was published. He didn't get to finish it, but it's most of it is out there. I think it'd be very interesting to study it one day. Then comes the book of Job, okay, a very difficult story about faith and resilience of the faith of human beings, with the story of Job that loses everything he has in life, and it's sort of like as a test by Satan and God to see if he would curse God and forget his faith, which he does not. And it's a very long book, very, very, very difficult book to study, and it has sort of like a happy ending because he gets, a wife and kids, new ones, but he rebuilds his life, and it's a book that is studied in all theological departments about faith and resilience. Yeah.
Makes the book, like you just said, it's a book that's very difficult to study. What makes a book difficult to study?
Language. The Hebrew in it is very vague, not clear. The language is very difficult Hebrew. For me, if I would pick it up and try to explain it to you offhand, I would not be able to do that. I would have to, you know, use a translation or use commentary. Okay, it's not like, you know, in the Bible, I open the Torah and I would read a verse and I would explain to you just as it is.
So
But in the book of Job, I would not be able to do that.
So do people sit around, you know, like I see in movies, you know, like the men, and they're at a table and they're discussing, you know, different aspects of Judaism or whatever's written. So when a person would study a book, would they do it on their own, or would they do it in a group and
So they do it in a
chuckle
group.
Yeah.
They do it in
so are they
pairs,
all
but
trying
not
to
for the book
think-
of Job. They would do it more for like the Talmud. We'll talk
Oh,
about that. I'll show you photos of that.
Oh, and
way
then
of
like
studying.
kick around ideas.
Yes,
Oh,
Exactly.
okay.
That's more for the Talmud, not for typical Job.
Yes,
Oh,
Rabbi,
she's
I
doing that.
think you do know the answer why it's hard to read. And I think it's not because
Oh,
language,
yes, thank you.
but because the ideas were in those books. And I know these Orthodox people, they don't want even to look at this book.
Well, it's a
This is
difficult
not
book.
language.
It is a difficult book. I don't want to focus specifically
you're
about this
afraid to
book,
say
but
it?
yeah, I don't want to specifically talk specifically about this book, but it's not studied a lot. Not a lot of people
Yeah.
study it.
The Christians
The
use it in a different way because they think of Satan as different than we do.
Interesting. Okay. Then we have the Song of Songs, that controversial book, but also, you know, a song about nature and the land of Israel. It's a beautiful book. It's just, you know, 8 chapters, and in some traditions, it is read every Friday before Kabbalat Shabbat. In the Sephardi tradition, they read it every Friday. In Ashkenazi traditions, it's read before Passover. Okay, because of the spring that's in it.
You said before Passover, I thought it was called.
I'm sorry, on Chol HaMoed Passover. Sorry, thank you for that correction. Then there's the book of Ruth that talks about that wonderful, amazing woman that converted to Judaism, and her faith in God, and that's read during the holiday of Shavuot. And then there's the book of Eicha, Lamentations, which talks about the destruction of the first temple, and that's read on Tisha B'Av, on the fast day of the day that was the temple was destroyed. Then is Kohelet, Ecclesiastes.
It's easier in Hebrew.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'm gonna have to say it 10 times so I can remember. Ecclesiastes. And that what does it mean even?
It's a group of people who are religious. Ecclesiastics comes from the Christians. Maybe it's Latin.
Uh-huh.
No, it sounds more Greek to me, but I don't know.
We don't know what
Said
you're
that.
meaning. Okay. But this is also associated with King Solomon, that he wrote this at the end of his life, and it talks about you know, living a meaningful life. Then comes and we read that on the holiday of Sukkot. Before, which is really sort of like the end of all holidays, and also sort of like as things are winding down and you have more time to think about your life, and also before the winter. So it's an interesting book as well. Then comes the book of Esther, which is the story of Purim, and that was written in exile. That's a book that one of the books that was not written in the land of Israel. And then there's a book of Daniel, which is a very interesting book, which has a lot of the visions of Daniel, who was a leader of the Jewish people in Babylonia, and is sort of like, or Persia actually, and is tested by the king there, thrown into fire, survives the fire, and would not be willing to worship other gods. It's like a story of real endurance and belief in God, and many parts of it are in Aramaic, which is also very interesting genre, because most of the Bible is really in Hebrew, as we know.
So it sets up a way to believe even in exile.
Yes, exactly. Very strong belief. Then come the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, which are really the builders of the second temple. They were leaders of the Jewish people in exile in Babylonia, and they are the time of King Koresh, who makes that famous declaration of Jews could go back to the land of Israel, and they're allowed to build the second temple, and they turn to all the people of Israel and they say, okay, we can finally leave Babylonia and we're all going back to the land of Israel and we're going to rebuild the second temple. And they start walking towards the land of Israel and they look back and everyone stayed in Babylonia. Okay, it's just them and a small group of people were willing to go back. But they go back and they rebuild the second temple. And the Bible sort of like ends around that time, around their time. So we could assume that that's around the time that the Bible is really composed. And then comes the Book of Chronicles, the Book of Chronicles 1 and Book of Chronicles 2, which sort of like gives out the history of the Jews from the creation of the world till the end of the time of the Bible, which is the return of Ezra and Nehemiah. It's a very interesting book. It has a lot of historical information that we don't see in any of the other Bibles. And apparently it's a genre of probably, there were like many, many other books like that. Okay, because we know throughout the other books that they tell, oh, if you want to read more about this story or this story, go to that book. Those books don't exist anymore. They were probably written like the Book of Chronicles. Okay, so it's a very interesting phenomena as well. I thought it's nice here to just see here the appendices in this Bible, Adam to Jacob, okay, timeline number 1, the timeline of the flood, the era of the judges, and the Jewish monarchy, and the Babylonian exile. This is like, if you get this Bible, it's a very good Bible because it has all these appendices in it as well. Okay, any questions about the Bible? Oh my God, we just did the Bible today.
Yeah,
No, that's not good.
yeah.
Okay. Oh, here, I wanted to show you this. The Gutenberg Bible was the first European book published on a printing press using movable metal type, printed in Latin. The right page here displays Genesis. Okay, what is Genesis? That's Genesis, the first book of the Bible. Okay, on February 23rd, 1455. Many scholars agreed that the Gutenberg Bible, one of the first books created with movable types in Western Europe, was published in Mainz, Germany. Okay, so that's very interesting, right? To see the first Bible here.
I saw that Bible.
Hmm?
I saw that Bible in Cologne.
Okay, and
Illuminated.
I also wanted to focus on in each book we have. I want to choose one text, which is like, what's the most important text of that? So very hard for me to say what are the most important texts in the Bible. So we could go around and people could maybe say, what do they think is the most important text in the Bible? George?
For me, I think Deuteronomy, because it's so controversial. There are big discussions about what's called the Deuteronomistic history.
Yeah.
And whether or not, how much of it is theology, how much is revisionist, because it was derived in the kingdom of Judah, and
Yeah,
how much it was a testimonial towards the superiority of Judah over Israel and the righteousness of the
yeah,
people of Judah as opposed to those of Israel, the kingdom of Israel.
okay, that's good. Yes, Larry.
I think Mishpatim,
Mm,
because it really tells you how you to deal with one another. How do you deal with animals?
Mm.
What's fair? What's
Oh, nice.
it's real life. It does, you know, the Ten Commandments talks, you know, kind of up in the clouds a little bit, and here gives you, you know, tie an ox to a donkey. You know, they're just
The more day-to-day.
it's all
things. It's
practical
beautiful.
stuff.
Nice. Anyone else? Yes.
I would have to say the Book of Ruth is that,
Oh.
because, one, because I converted to Judaism. And my name happens to be Naomi. I was just given that name at birth. It doesn't have, you know. And also because of the lineage that comes afterwards. So, for me, that would be the
Yeah,
one.
and of course, the lineage that comes afterward is King David,
Mhm.
and you know, which, yeah, that's beautiful. Yes, any other texts that you remember from the Bible or had influence on you?
I think,
What would be like a famous text?
I think
from
the
Bible?
beginning of the Bible where you have two different stories for the same thing.
Oh, nice. Yeah, for Genesis.
That drive you
Nice.
crazy.
Yeah.
Other famous parts would be the Shema, right? The
Mhm.
Hear, O Israel, the Ten Commandments, right? That would be pretty famous. So
You could also say the comparison between what's in Devarim and
and
what's
Beit Hanan, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and Exodus. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Say, say.